Cromwell Street, Gloucester, England, an ordinary house on an ordinary street. Number 25 belonged to a local builder and his wife. It was always busy and crowded with lodgers. People came and went constantly. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, except the sheer number of visitors passing through its doors. The man who lived there, Fred West, appeared to enjoy company. But behind that ordinary facade lay something far darker. He was a man capable of cruelty beyond imagination, mutilation, abuse, and murder. The question that haunted investigators was chilling. Was this seemingly ordinary man driven to kill, or was he born that way? During the trial of Rosemary West, prosecutor Richard Ferguson described Fred West as a man devoid of compassion, consumed by sexual obsession, a sadistic killer, and the embodiment of evil. Yet, if you passed him in the street, you might not notice him at all. He had a wife, 6 children, and the appearance of a normal working man. To neighbors, he was friendly, hardworking, even likable. A typical builder and handyman who blended easily into everyday life. But Fred West was a chameleon. Beneath his easy charm and sociable nature lurked something profoundly abnormal. He could appear warm and approachable, drawing people in with a convincing personality. Few would ever suspect that such a man could harbor such darkness. That was the terrifying truth. Evil does not always reveal itself. What drove him remains one of the greatest mysteries. Together with Rosemary, they descended into unimaginable depravity. While others dream of success, power, or recognition, Fred West seemed driven by a far more sinister ambition, the pursuit of sadistic violence. He could present himself as friendly and harmless, but it was only ever a mask. Behind it was something monstrous. Frederick Stephen West was born on September 29, 1941, in the rural village of Muchmarcle in Herefordshire. It was an isolated farming community, far removed from city life. He grew up as the second of 6 children, a striking boy with blonde curls and piercing blue eyes. But beneath that appearance, his early life was shaped by disturbing influences. His childhood environment was harsh and deeply troubling. Violence was normalized. He witnessed cruelty to animals and experienced abuse within his own family. It has been widely suggested that both his parents played damaging roles in shaping his early behavior. From a young age, he was exposed to inappropriate and abusive experiences that blurred boundaries and distorted his understanding of relationships. His education was short-lived. He left school at just 14, with limited literacy and few prospects. With little structure or guidance, his behavior became increasingly erratic. Petty crime, aggression, and troubling tendencies began to emerge. A turning point came in 1958 when a motorcycle accident left him with serious injuries, including head trauma. He was unconscious for days. Some experts later believe this injury may have affected the part of the brain responsible for impulse control and moral judgment. After the accident, he changed. He became more volatile, more aggressive. The charm he once relied on began to fade, replaced by darker impulses. His behavior toward women became increasingly predatory. As his life unfolded, relationships became unstable and destructive. One of the most significant figures was a young woman named Catherine Rena Costello. Their relationship was turbulent, marked by control, conflict, and instability. When she eventually left, taking distance from him, Fred retained control over the children and continued his chaotic lifestyle, bringing other young women into his orbit. One of them, Anne McFall, would tragically become one of his earliest victims. Her disappearance in 1967 marked a grim turning point. Years later, her remains were discovered, evidence of calculated violence and a complete lack of remorse. For Fred West, people had become disposable. This was only the beginning. In time, he would meet Rosemary West, a woman whose own troubled past mirrored his. Together, they formed a deeply disturbing partnership, one that would descend into some of the most horrific crimes in modern British history. For Rose, even something as natural as motherhood seemed distant. Breastfeeding, for example, felt unfamiliar, almost alien to her. She was a strict disciplinarian, ruling the West household with an iron hand. The children were raised under rigid control. Their lives were tightly structured. They went to school and returned home, but were never encouraged to form friendships or connect with the outside world. Among them, the child who suffered most was 8-year-old Charmaine. In June 1971, while Fred West was nearing the end of a prison sentence for theft, Charmaine disappeared. Her death marked a turning point. Once Rosemary West had taken part in the killing, she was no longer merely complicit. She was equally guilty. From that moment, there was no turning back. The act bound them together in a shared secret, a dark partnership cemented by violence. It created a dangerous dynamic. Once they had eliminated a problem, there were no limits to what they might do next. One such problem was Charmaine's biological mother, Rena. When Rena came searching for her daughter, She unknowingly sealed her fate. Charmaine was gone and could never be found. The only way to protect the truth was to silence her. Rena was last seen alive in the autumn of 1971. Years later, her dismembered remains were discovered in a field near Muchmarkel. Nearby lay the remains of Anne McFall, another victim, discarded without remorse. For Fred West, this area became something deeply personal, a place he knew well, a place he could return to. It was practical, familiar, and, in his mind, controllable. Even in death, he sought possession. It became his private graveyard. With Rena gone, Fred was free to marry Rosemary. In January 1972, they moved into a house that would later become infamous, 25 Cromwell Street. The property stood in a transient neighborhood, filled with lodgers and people passing through, individuals who were often disconnected from family or support systems. This anonymity allowed the couple to operate undetected for years. It was the perfect cover. Together, Fred and Rose refined their methods. Fred alone could be charming and persuasive, but with Rose beside him and the presence of a normal family, they appeared trustworthy. Gradually, they evolved into a calculated predatory unit, capable of targeting vulnerable individuals with chilling efficiency. In November 1972, 17-year-old Caroline Owens accepted a lift while hitchhiking. The couple seemed friendly, even inviting. They spoke about their children and offered her the opportunity to work as a nanny. To Caroline, it felt like an escape, a chance at a better life. But the dream quickly turned into a nightmare. Over time, she began to sense something was wrong. Disturbing comments and inappropriate behavior raised alarm. Eventually, Fred made explicit advances, suggesting she join their sexual activities. Shocked and disgusted, Caroline left. But months later, she encountered them again. They appeared apologetic and persuaded her to accept another lift. This time, the situation escalated violently. She was attacked, restrained, and taken back to their home, where she endured hours of physical and sexual abuse. Miraculously, she survived. Through a combination of manipulation and desperation, she managed to escape and went straight to the police. Yet, despite the severity of the crimes, the outcome was shockingly lenient. The couple received minimal punishment, avoiding more serious charges when Caroline was too frightened to testify fully. The consequences were devastating. That moment reinforced a dangerous belief that they could act without facing real consequences. It emboldened them. From then on, they adapted. They would not make the same mistake again. Future victims would not be allowed to escape. Instead, they began targeting those on the margins of society, young women who were vulnerable, isolated, or unlikely to be immediately missed. These victims were carefully selected, manipulated, and taken back to Cromwell Street. There, in the cellar, unimaginable horrors unfolded. While the full details remain uncertain, evidence suggests prolonged abuse, torture, and extreme cruelty. Victims were subjected to acts that defy comprehension before ultimately being killed. Their bodies were then dismembered and buried. When space ran out, the cellar floor was covered, concealing what lay beneath. Above it, life continued as if nothing had happened. Over the next 14 years, Fred West and Rosemary West would continue their crimes, refining their methods and deepening their descent into darkness, hidden in plain sight behind the walls of an ordinary home. As time passed, the boundaries of their behavior were pushed further and further. For Rosemary West, control was essential. She needed dominance, authority, and power over every situation. For Fred West, there was a constant drive toward increasingly extreme acts of sadism and bondage. Nothing was ever enough. They always wanted more. More fear, more pain, more control. Each act escalated beyond the last. The violence intensified, becoming more calculated and more brutal. Victims were subjected to unimaginable suffering, bound, gagged, beaten, cut, and abused, often disoriented and unable to comprehend what was happening. The terror they endured was beyond human understanding. As their crimes deepened, the danger extended even to themselves. There was likely an unspoken tension between Fred and Rose, a sense that either one could become the next victim. This created a chilling dynamic of competition, where each had to prove they were as ruthless and dangerous as the other. By June 1987, their eldest daughter, Heather, was 16 years old. After years of enduring abuse, she had become, in their eyes, a problem. One day, while the other children were at school, Heather was murdered. There is no evidence of sexual assault in her case. Her death appeared to be a calculated act of elimination. Her body was disposed of in a method typical of Fred West and buried beneath what would later become a patio. It was a cold, deliberate act. Heather's continued existence posed a risk. She may have exposed the truth, threatened the fragile facade the family maintained. Her murder was not only an act of control, it was a warning to the other children. For 8 years, Her body remained hidden beneath the garden. During that time, her disappearance became the subject of a grim and disturbing joke within the household. Fred and Rose would warn their children to behave, or risk ending up under the patio like Heather. Eventually, rumors reached the attention of a determined police officer, Hazel Savage. Convinced something was wrong, she pushed for further investigation. On February 24, 1994, police arrived at 25 Cromwell Street. What they uncovered would shock the world. As officers began digging in the garden, they expected to find one body. Instead, they discovered human remains that suggested something far worse. Forensic expert Bernard Knight confirmed their fears. There was more than one victim, many more. In total, multiple bodies were recovered from the property and surrounding areas. The scale of the crimes was staggering. Fred West was arrested. Despite the overwhelming evidence, he appeared strangely detached, almost unable to grasp the seriousness of his situation. At times, he seemed to believe he might simply walk free, but the truth was closing in. He eventually guided police to additional burial sites, though he withheld some information. Investigators uncovered more remains beneath the house itself, hidden for years. The full horror was finally exposed. Among the victims identified were numerous young women, along with Heather. Fred was also charged with the murders of his first wife, Catherine Costello, and his stepdaughter Charmaine. As the investigation unfolded, disturbing questions emerged. Some skeletal remains were incomplete, bones missing in ways that raised speculation. While theories ranged from practical concealment to more disturbing possibilities, definitive answers were never fully established. On June 30th, 1994, Fred and Rose appeared in court, charged with multiple murders. It would be the last time they were seen together. When Rosemary West rejected him in court, Fred was visibly shaken. The confident facade he had maintained began to collapse. 6 months later, on January 1st, 1995, while awaiting trial in prison, Fred West took his own life. He died before facing full justice. Rosemary West was left to stand trial alone. Maintaining her denial, she attempted to distance herself from the crimes. But the evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. Though the investigation officially closed, lingering doubts remain. Some believe there may have been more victims, lives lost without ever being connected to the case. The house at 25 Cromwell Street was eventually demolished, an attempt to erase its dark history. In its place now stands a simple walkway. But for survivors like Caroline Owens, the past cannot be so easily buried. The ground still holds memories of suffering, loss, and unimaginable cruelty. The legacy of Fred West is one of the most disturbing in modern history. His crimes raise haunting questions. Was he shaped by his environment, his upbringing, and trauma, or was something darker present from the very beginning? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. What remains certain is this: behind an ordinary life, unimaginable evil can exist, hidden in plain sight.